And so it's unclear exactly how long this process could take. But in the eyes of several leaders, there can't be a phase 2 without the completion of this phase 1 and getting those last couple bodies back.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. And Mike, the Trump administration has continued its offensive against alleged drug boats going after the cartels. What's the latest?
Earlier this week, we were notified of the 16th strike on a alleged drug smuggling vessel that are tied to Venezuela. And so at this point, as I said, there have been 16 strikes. There are believed to be about 65 people killed in these 16 strikes. And so at this point, we're in a very interesting time period because the War Power Resolution from 1973, the Trump administration said it did not apply to these operations. And so that was a controversial announcement that received some blowback, primarily from Democrats, but really on Capitol Hill, we're seeing just calls for more information and briefings, either classified or non, but just more information to be released about the strategy and the determinations they're making. But the War Powers Resolution essentially calls for a 60-day period from the time the White House or the executive notifies Congress of an instance of military force, and it gives Congress 60 days to either approve a declaration of war, extend that time frame, or there's a third option in which they couldn't meet. But so in this case, the Trump administration's lawyers argued that this was not actually relevant to what they're doing because while they say it is an international conflict, U.S. soldiers are not at risk carrying out these strikes, and thus they are not necessarily obligated to abide by the War Powers Resolution. And so we've seen one strike since that 60-day time frame expired earlier this week, and it was notable because it was the first. And so we've heard from Secretary Hegseth and President Trump that they expect these strikes to continue moving forward. And so the question now becomes, are these strikes going to be the primary or the only part of this campaign?
Right.
Because according to nearly every expert I've spoken with, the amount of force and the number of troops that the U.S. currently has in the Caribbean far exceeds their current operations. We're talking about a U.S. military buildup in the Western Hemisphere in the Caribbean, unlike anything we've seen in my lifetime. And so this really is a dramatic moment, and there's a lot of speculation among experts as to whether or not we could see potentially strikes inside of Venezuela, as well as potentially an operation to try and remove President Nicolás Maduro from power. And so the U.S. government believes Maduro is an illegitimate leader because, according to nearly every country across the world, he claimed he won the election last year when he, in fact, didn't. And so the Trump administration is trying several different ways to put pressure on him to figure out how to move forward. And so the more extreme version of where we go from here is seeing potentially a U.S. bombing campaign inside of Venezuela, which would likely be worked in concert with covert CIA operations within Venezuela, which President Trump has already said he's approved. A much less extreme version of that would be just a continuation of the current strikes we're seeing, and then eventually it could peter out.
So is this really about trying to get Maduro out of power?
It depends who you ask at this point. Everyone's eyes are on sort of what is the overarching strategy, what is the long-term goal, because as I said, the amount of firepower they have in the region far exceeds the current operations they're doing at the pace they're doing them at.
So what's the latest with the fragile Israel-Gaza ceasefire? Have there been any new developments there?
At this point, we are at the tail end of the phase 1 part of the ceasefire. And so phase 1 largely called for the release of all 48 remaining Israeli hostages in exchange for thousands of Palestinians, detainees. And so all of the living Israeli hostages were released within a matter of days after the agreement commenced. But at this point, Hamas is still trying to recover a handful of the 28 bodies that they had been holding at the start of the ceasefire. At this point, there are about 7 bodies who have yet to be found and handed over. And when this process happens, the Red Cross is intimately involved. And so when Hamas believes they locate a body, they will try and dig it up. They will hand it over to the Red Cross, who will then hand it over to the IDF, who brings it to Israel, where they do DNA testing to try and determine whether or not the remains are actually one of the hostages. We have seen some instances already where Hamas has tried to hand back remains that did not belong to one of the Israeli hostages, and now we don't know exactly whether that was intentional or not, because we don't know exactly what the remains look like and how much they have deteriorated. And so another concern that we've heard from leaders is that some of the bodies could be held in territory that Israel now controls and isn't letting any Palestinian in. And so as the ceasefire commenced, Israeli troops moved further away from some of the more populated areas in Gaza. But the question is, now that they're holding this territory and there are no Palestinians in them, how can Hamas try and recover bodies from that area?
Right.
And so when that happens, they will reach out to the Red Cross who's in the area. The Red Cross will then inform the IDF, who will then just sort of shallowly remove themselves from the area so that there won't be any sort of conflict. They will give Hamas a little bit of time to dig, and if they do find a body, they hand it to the Red Cross, who then gives it to the IDF. And so we still have a handful of families who are waiting for the remains of their loved ones. And so it's unclear exactly how long this process could take, but in the eyes of several leaders, there can't be a phase 2 without the completion of this phase 1 and getting those last couple bodies back.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.